Joining me tonight to talk about the president's continued success in his every undertaking, whether in domestic politics, international trade, or foreign policy, President Trump standing taller than ever on the world stage after these Lilliputians bray at the moon after his successful summit with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. Congressman Ron DeSantis joining us tonight. He sits on the Foreign Affairs, Oversight, and Government Reform and Judiciary Committees, also the leading Republican candidate to be governor of the great state of Florida. He joins us now. Good to have you with us. I have to ask you, what was your reaction as you heard most of those folks? I mean, Chuck Schumer, he looked like he'd rather be anywhere than in front of those cameras and microphones, spewing that nonsense that obviously not even he could pretend was relevant or true.
Well, if President Trump decided to start walking on top of the Potomac River and cross it, they would say, oh, Trump can't swim. I mean, that's just their instinct, is to always try to be against anything he's doing. And if this had been Obama dealing with Iran, obviously Obama didn't do anything to put pressure on them. They just gave concessions. They all justified that. The foreign policy elite in Washington, by and large, justified Obama's actions. And now they're all lining up against Trump just because they don't like him and they're not giving him credit. The fact of the matter is the summit was historic, and it was a summit that was brought to bear by the leadership of Donald Trump and the pressure campaign that they exerted for over a year against North Korea.
Congressman, I may have missed it, but I didn't hear from Mitch McConnell about how great the president's success was in Singapore. I haven't heard the House Speaker acknowledge, applaud, or in any way acknowledge his success. I haven't heard, as a matter of fact, from the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable. I haven't heard from business leadership. I haven't heard from the Council on Foreign Relations. The quiet is on both sides of the aisle. And it is, I'm sure, knowing this president, he is getting great fuel from it. But the fact is, it's embarrassing to every one of those people I mentioned, to the leadership of both parties, that they are not applauding this president's accomplishments. Aren't you embarrassed for the Republican Party itself?
Well, when you have people that have been a part of Washington, all those groups, some of the individuals, I mean, they're part of kind of a permanent class here. And we've had 25 years of failure with respect to North Korea. Presidents of multiple administrations, various parties. And that was kind of them following the Beltway conventional wisdom. And it just hasn't worked. So you have Trump, who's breaking that mold. He's not captive to what people inside the Beltway think. He's not captive to conventional wisdom. He's charting new ground, and he's getting more results. And so I think that there is somewhat of a resentment just because he's not listening to a lot of the people who think that they're so wise about these things.
Well, thank God. I mean, but at the same time, Congressman, I'm sure you don't mean to suggest or intimate in any way that that is a rationalization for the petty arcade of clowns that make up the leadership of the Republican Party on Capitol Hill.
Well, look, I think that this was something that, as an American, it was just it was an unbelievable sight to see that. And I think that we should all be pulling for the president to continue to bring good results here. So the extent, and I have not been following exactly what everyone has said. We just got back into town.
They haven't said anything. You don't have to worry about following it because these people don't have either the guts or the principle to say much in support of this president and his obviously successful policies in support of the American middle class, the American working family. I mean, it's embarrassing to watch this. So that raises a couple of questions. We're told right now that the meetings are still going on in the Speaker's office, that there's a discharge petition ready to burp upon the scene with rhinos and Dems driving away at the behest of the Speaker, who sold out long ago to many of the people I just talked about, the Chamber, the Business Roundtable, Wall Street, the Koch brothers. Are we going to see another midnight massacre at the hands of this morbid, lame duck Speaker?
Well, I hope that we don't see a discharge petition. And Lou, part of the reason why we're even dealing with this is because the Congress has not been willing, as I've been arguing we should be doing, voting on the core points of President Trump's immigration platform, building, authorizing and funding the border wall, doing things like ending chain migration, going to a skills-based immigration system, killing the diversity lottery. We haven't had any votes on any of that. And had we done that, I think you would see even more Americans rally to the cause, and you wouldn't be in this situation where you're all of a sudden facing a discharge petition.
Congressman, how can your conference, and you and I have talked about this, how can you tolerate the stench of that man in the Speaker's office as he is about to consign your party to the most dramatic defeat in the midterms? Snatching victory from the jaws. I mean, it's just, when I think about this, it is disgusting to me. This is a president who's doing everything right. He's achieving more than any president since FDR, and he's got a Republican conference, and particularly in the House, and leadership in the House and the Senate, who frankly are so politically upside down and working against the interest of the country and the middle class, working men and women in the family. You're selling them out, your conference, not you. But your conference.
I think, you know, policy-wise, you know, you're right. Doing an amnesty will be counterproductive. But politically, I think you're even doubly right. If you do an amnesty, you're going to take away some of the momentum that we've built because of the president's success. I mean, remember, 6 months ago, everyone said there was going to be a blue wave. People aren't saying that anymore. And I think part of the reason is because the policies have really been focused on working Americans, folks in the middle class who are now keeping more of what they earn. They're seeing higher wages and higher salaries. And this would blunt that momentum, Lou. So I agree with you. I think it's political malpractice, and it creates a greater likelihood that you have Nancy Pelosi as Speaker after November.